Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to the latest webinar from SimLogic. The title of today's webinar is the key drivers to IIoT technology adoption in the pharmaceutical manufacturing sector. What you'll notice there on the title is that we've called it drivers to IIoT technology. I've used that very specifically rather than Industry 4 or IoT because I think it best describes what we're trying to do in this industry in terms of it's the industrial Internet of Things is a little bit more tangible to me than just saying Industry 4. What is that? It can be multiple different things to different people. So by calling it IIoT, I think that says, well, IoT, I know what that is. That's me controlling my heating at home from my mobile or being able to turn lights on when somebody walks into a room. All I'm going to do is apply that same thinking to an industrial space or a manufacturing space. So that's the kind of purpose of the things we're going to be discussing in today's webinar. Just a touch of housekeeping beforehand. You'll all see the GoToWebinar control panel on your screen. If you do have any questions during the webinar, then please feel free to ask them in the questions panel. We'll have some time towards the end of the session where we'll pick up a few of those. And if we do run out of time, we will follow up after the webinar in writing over email to all those that have signed up with the answers to everyone's questions. So none will be missed out. If you don't want to get a copy of the presentation, then please feel free to send an email across to inquiries@simlogic.co.uk. We'll also be putting a link to the webinar on our YouTube channel and website. Okay, so general introductions. I'm Fraser Thomson. Hello. Nice to flick to the real video so everyone sees we're real people. I'm the Business Development Director here with SimLogic. I've been with SimLogic now for, what must be the best part, getting on for about 11 years or so. I've got a controls engineering background and more recently with SimLogic, looking at the manufacturing operations management sector, which some people used to call MES, I guess, and is now called kind of MOM. My kind of main drivers are driving improvement in manufacturing through the adoption of kind of software and technology approaches. I'm a little bit of a kind of a manufacturing geek, I suppose you would say, to that effect. I'm the worst person to go to the supermarket with because I'm forever picking up new things off the shelf and seeing where they're made and wanting to know how they're made. What really kind of drives me is trying to make manufacturing more efficient, more lean. Specifically, UK manufacturing is something we're really kind of keen and passionate about here at SimLogic. You know, we want to make sure that manufacturing goes back to being the kind of bedrock of the UK economy, and we kind of fill that perceived productivity gap that the government keep talking about. I suppose that's my main drivers.
Okay. Right, thanks, Fraser. Yeah, so I'm Oliver Stone. I am the Head of Operational Excellence for SimLogic, and I've been working in manufacturing now for a little over 4 years, generally to provide some advice around how to best implement lean manufacturing into businesses, and then also developing a lean culture within a business to help drive value and performance improvement. My time while I'm working with SimLogic and all of the things that we're trying to do is really to make sure that the investments that you are putting in by putting in technology and systems, you're getting the most from your investment and really adding value. For me, I like to implement some really basic tools which allow you to get some quick wins and really start to drive value from what you're trying to do with us as a business.
Thanks, Oliver. Just as a brief overview and introduction to who SimLogic are as well. We've been around now since about 1997, so we celebrated our 20th year. Not last year because it's 2019 already, and time moves on quite quickly. Historically, you would have seen us as a typical control systems integrator in the manufacturing sector. That was our kind of beginnings. But I'd say over the last 10 years, we've now evolved into a company that's keen to drive manufacturing improvement through the collection and visualization and analysis of data. And that data could be anything from counting widgets on the shop floor to looking at electronic quality management or electronic batch record type systems. So they're the kind of things that drive us. And again, I think pretty much I'll speak for everybody within these four walls at the moment that we all have a rather strange passion for UK manufacturing, which makes us kind of well placed to solve the manufacturing problems that you find yourselves challenged with. So if we jump into the agenda for today's session, things we're going to be looking at, we're going to be talking about the challenges specifically faced within the manufacturing pharmaceutical sector around some of the kind of data collection and analysis activities that we get involved in. We'll look a little bit about what's going to drive people to adopt some of this new technology that's coming in every day. I think there's something new, something interesting that we get to hear about. We'll talk a little bit about validated systems. That's the thing specifically within the pharmaceutical sector that's on the back of everyone's mind. We need to maintain a kind of license to sell in the areas that we're selling them, and we need to maintain those validated systems. Our approach to data capture, which we think it may not be unique, but it's there and it's solving a problem that people face. We'll look at some of the ways in which we do that, looking at smart data collectors that are available, wireless data collectors. And then we'll go in to discuss a little bit about the challenges of using Lean within a GAMP or GXP type environment. And once we've enabled some data capture and some visualization, actually, what are we going to do with it? So that's hopefully what we're going to cover off in today's session. Some of the challenges that we see being faced by the pharmaceutical sector against some of our customers are within this kind of sector as well. So we're talking about things like year-on-year price rises. There's a lot of competition coming into the sector as the typical products that people have been manufacturing come to the end of their kind of license period and they go out to be more kind of generics. Again, there's a challenge to be more efficient in terms of the cost base of our manufacturing operations, looking at materials variance, labour variance, and those kind of things. Again, we're a very highly regulated industry, so trying to implement some kind of change is going to be very kind of tightly controlled. Again, that kind of license to sell is the key thing that's sitting at the top of everybody's mind when they think about making changes to their manufacturing environment. Some of this new technology could come with risks. You know, what are the I want to put some wireless devices in. What about cyber security? You know, we certainly saw over the last few years there's been a couple of, I would call them incidents, cyber attack related that have caused issues. You'll know from the news examples with the NHS, for example. These kind of devices, they do, you know, potentially represent a risk that needs to be mitigated. One of the biggest ones that we come across certainly that we see is this infrastructure or a lack of infrastructure that manufacturing systems have grown over time. They've been added to, they've been enhanced, they've been bought in from third parties from other sites, and potentially they've been put in without kind of data collection in mind, because it wasn't a thing kind of 10, 15 years ago. If you were putting a manufacturing line in, you just want to make sure that you could make as many widgets as you could, as fast as you could, and not necessarily that all the machines were connected together and they were put on a common network, and that you had the ability to get into that network. So this kind of infrastructure challenge is quite a key one, really, particularly when it comes to the cost. The cost of infrastructure can be quite a large piece of the puzzle, really. If you want to consider, you know, I want to go and connect to every PLC on my shop floor and connect every piece of data that's possibly available, that's a piece of work and an exercise in itself that potentially is going to cost you 6-7 figures, and is going to be 3 to 4 years away before you've actually implemented everything that's going to give you some data to drive some improvement. Well,
and it can also be a stumbling block for projects to get off the ground.
That's it. Yeah, you know, it can make it too cost prohibitive. You know, if the return on investment is going to happen from actually what you're going to do with the data once you've started to capture it, then how do you demonstrate return on improving your network infrastructure? Again, the validated systems question, we're going to touch on that a little bit later on, so I won't go into too much detail just here. And when it comes to, you know, kind of automated data capture, there's that question of, well, you know, we already do it manually, and if it's not broke, don't fix it. Don't need to change it. I can meet all of my objectives potentially with the manual data system that I already get, and Oliver's going to cover some of that off a little bit later in the session. But let's not forget that all this technology is coming and it's here now. And if we don't start to make use of it, we don't start to adopt it, somebody else is. And those companies that are adopting it, they're going to get a head start. They're going to get a jump on all the competition. And there is the risk that the companies can get left behind if they don't think about how they're going to make use of this technology. So, how are we going to drive this adoption of this technology? Well, there's a recent study there by McKinsey that says that market-leading pharma manufacturers in particular are 53% faster at getting products to market compared to their competition as a result of being more efficient. That for me is a pretty good driver to say, actually. It's quite important to be efficient. If we're thinking about new product introduction, the pace at which new products are being introduced to market at the moment is increasing. Yeah. We're going to be looking as the industry changes to be doing higher volumes of different types of products, product families, shorter production runs. These are market driving forces. Yeah. If you're having to produce more products on the same lines that you already have, you're going to need to do more changeovers. If you're going to need to do more changeovers, you're going to have more downtime. It means you're going to need to be more efficient on your changeovers. You're going to need to do something about it. So that's a very big driver for me that says we've got to really start adopting some of this kind of technology to help us kind of drive that ability to give us these flexible production lines on which we can produce kind of multiple products and do fast changeovers and SMED and so on. There's also this kind of concept of IIoT, I can't even say it, IIoT platforms coming through at the moment. Microsoft are certainly making a big push with Azure, Amazon with AWS. There are platforms here that are designed to make your infrastructure IT simpler from your side, and they come with tools and features that are supposed to be able to kind of enhance and enable you to do things better, to be quicker to market with IT and software type systems. So let's tackle the elephant in the room, the kind of validated system question. Again, all of the systems, obviously control systems within our pharmaceutical manufacturing environment are going to be validated. Yeah. There's no question about it. And in terms of if you want to do a data capture project, you're going to need to get some data. The first place you're going to look is that control system. Mm-hmm. And that's going to put the big red flags up in the QA department that says, well, hold on a minute. You can't connect into there. That's a validated system. If you do, you're going to need to do this, and this. Yeah. So that's a valid concern. So the first concern is there another way to do that? Is there a way where we can get the data we want without connecting into a validated system? Is there a way we can get the data we want without impacting the validated nature of our production lines? If you do want to do that, then that's great. That's fine. That might form part of a kind of a 5-year strategy to get all of your data into a data lake to enable kind of big data analysis and analytics and so on. But again, let's think about time to market. It might take you 3 to 5 years to implement that kind of strategy, and we want to drive some continuous improvement today, tomorrow, next week, the week after. And again, as we discussed earlier, the ROI, when you need to spend 6, 7 figures on infrastructure projects, is going to be much harder to achieve, let alone demonstrate to get that kind of finance approved. So the question we kind of asked ourselves at SimLogic is what if, because this is not the validated is very, very specific to pharmaceuticals, but this kind of infrastructure cost is not. That's common across kind of multiple verticals for everybody. So we kind of asked ourselves the same question at SimLogic and say, what if we could do that piece for 10 to 100 times factor less in terms of cost? The technology is out there now. Let's not let this question mark of whether it should or shouldn't be validated be a kind of a thing that holds us back, if you like. The key thing for me within the pharmaceutical sector is that if you're looking at a system to capture performance-related data from your shop floor, then you're not going to be using that information to make production impacting decisions. You're not going to be impacting the quality of what you're producing. It's an information system. Yes, we're going to be storing data. Yes, we're going to be processing some data, but the data is not going to be used to make product quality decisions. So in my mind, that should be a reason to say, actually, these types of systems, They don't need to be validated. The only thing we need to consider is the source of the data a validated system? And that's where we come into our kind of approach on data capture. So yes, you can connect to every machine on the shop floor, and yes, you can get every tag out of the machine on the shop floor. And if you're talking about putting an OEE data capture system in, for example, you'll want to know when the machine went into a stopped or a starved or a blocked state. But you might necessarily not need to know that it went into that stopped state because machine door number 3 was opened. Yes, you can get all of this information from the PLCs, from the shop floor, but you need to combine it with some context from the operators. And certainly in our experience, the kind of value of the data that you can get from the PLC is kind of it's like a law of diminishing returns, really. You can spend a lot of money trying to get every piece of data that's 100% accurate, when what you actually needed to drive some improvement was that first 20%. So our kind of approach is to say simple. If I want an OEE metric, as an example, the most basic way to get that information from our production line is 1 or 2 data collection points on that line. If we're talking about a theory of constraints type approach, then maybe the input to the bottleneck, that would give us our running state, it would give us our running speed. If we then had an output from the line, we could use the difference between the 2 counts to give us a quality indication. But again, particularly, let's say in packaging applications, a lot of people tend to find that the Q part of the OEE metric, the quality, is already 98.5, 99%. So for the extra cost that it takes to get that Q metric and get it right, is it kind of worth it? Is it beneficial to us? And a lot of people decide not to use it, and they just take the availability and the performance metrics, which you could just do with the one sensor from the in-feed to the bottleneck. That's going to give you everything that you didn't have with your manual system. It's going to give you accurate records of your downtime to the minute, to the second. In fact, it's going to tell you exactly how long you stopped for, again, down to the second. On your manual systems, for example, I'd be very surprised if things weren't in buckets of 5 minutes or 10 minutes or 15 minutes. And we can actually tell you every time you stopped for 20 seconds, 25 seconds, 15 seconds, 1 minute and 32 seconds. And quite often we see that's an invisible loss to a lot of people, because those kind of things can happen when you turn your back to the production line and it stops, and sometimes you just don't see it.
I think it's important to realise that even at the most basic level of data capture, once it's in an automated fashion, it can provide a lot more information around low-hanging fruit that perhaps just wasn't realised at the time when you weren't at that stage of that level of automation.
If you don't see it, how can you improve it?
Exactly.
But we mustn't forget, we need to combine that with kind of manual input for kind of context. So yes, from one sensor we can tell when your line stopped and when it started, but we'll absolutely rely on input from a person to say, line stopped in that case because I saw that the insert was going to jam into the cartoner and it was going to cause a problem. So I opened machine door number 3 that triggered the machine door number 3 alarm that previously would have been our top loss reason on the Pareto chart. So it's important to get that balance between the two. So let's have a think about how we're going to do that. So we're talking about IIoT. We're talking about simple ways to capture data to drive kind of production efficiency improvements. What we're actually talking about is smart data collection systems. There are multiple different ways to do this out there on the market, all of which have probably been released in the last kind of 1-2 years. They go all the way from kind of Zigbee wireless sensors with ad hoc wireless networks through to complete systems that you couldn't really imagine, where light stacks on machines are completely wireless and they're sending information left, right, and center using multi-hops, for example. So wireless we see as kind of the way forward. When we think about that infrastructure cost, a big part of that infrastructure cost was actually I need to pull some cables, and that can only be done at the weekend when the rates for my electrical subcontractor are double. They're going to need some lift equipment, some cherry pickers, some magic carpets. All of that kind of adds infrastructure costs. And again, if we're talking about validated systems, those are the types of things that are going to start making the QA team quite nervous. So let's get wireless. The technology is out there. We're using devices at the moment that are not only using kind of industrialized wireless networks, but militarized wireless networks for security, really. That's the main point of it. But again, if we're talking about how this is going to look, we talk about wireless sensors on the line. They're going to need some kind of central data concentrator, if you like, for that information to go back with, and that's the wireless link between those two devices.
Sure.
And if somebody does hack into it, because if somebody wants to do something, they'll probably try and find a way. Because we're not connected into the machine control, all they're going to be able to see is a signal going on off, on off every time we count a carton or a blister pack, for example. So there's an element of kind of inbuilt security to that kind of layer. That's definitely got to be the way forward for me. It means that you can go in and you can do an infrastructure system in a light approach way that's going to give you 80% of the data you're going to need to drive any kind of improvement, as it says there at the bottom, to fast track your continuous improvement journey. If you can't afford to wait for 3 to 5 years, then using these kind of devices are going to be great. Yeah. It might involve, fitting a new sensor to your production line where one didn't exist before. So there may be a little bit of kind of downtime required while somebody drills and taps a hole.
Sure, but that takes an awful lot less time than running 300 meters of cable over the weekend.
Absolutely, yeah. And there is always the possibility. If you did want to use sensors that were already existing on the line, then again, there's ways that you can piggyback off signals from sensors using optically isolated relays, for example. Again, that mean you can ensure the integrity of your existing validated systems and not get in the way of that. So there are lots of different ways you can think about getting that data. The way I would position it to the audience and those that are watching are, think of the challenge that you're trying to address and come to a company like us with that challenge, and we find the kind of most innovative solution to that challenge using some of the technology that's kind of available on the market. So at that point, I can take a bit of a breath and a drink, and I can pass over to you.
Okay, thank you. So what I'm going to do to start off with is just try and give you a little bit of background of why personally I feel that lean has struggled for an uptake in the pharma industry over the longer period, and then perhaps we'll look at the closer period to now and why it's getting a bit more traction and some of the things that really complement the pharma industry. So generally in the past, lean has had a little bit of a backward step from the pharma industry, and that's generally because it was an element of comfort, that there was an awful lot of patented blockbuster drugs that meant that there was high profit and a need, to be brutally honest, around efficiency was lower because the element of cash was rich and there wasn't a need for it. And as an example, quite a few years ago, we went to a lean, someone who was starting their lean journey in the pharma industry. And when questioning things, we got a OEE figure of 18% off of them, which at the time was deemed quite acceptable. But now, for elements that Fraser mentioned around the patents running out and the generic drug manufacturers are maybe running at a little bit more efficient capacity, that the need to be better and to improve is definitely there. So that's an element of why perhaps there was a slow uptake. There are obviously other barriers to lean that are important to think about. And that's that lean itself and its principles of reducing waste and only creating value for your end customer could possibly be seen to differ from GXP's objectives of ensuring that every drug that goes out the door is safe and controlled and will be delivering an effective medicine. In a lean perspective, this would generally be viewed as business value add, but as the end customer that's using the drug, potentially he would be thinking that, am I willing to pay for all this levels of bureaucracy and compliance and quality checking? But obviously it is important to realise that these things are there for a reason, and that without them, that there's a danger of giving dangerous drugs out.
And you lose your license to
Yes,
sell.
exactly. However, there are some quite nice shared principles within Lean and GXP, and I'm just going to touch briefly on those two things. The first one is standardization. And there is certainly an element of standardization within the pharma industry currently when we look at things like test plans and SOPs. And these are generally written by the people that developed the drug at the time, and they're written into the validated process. However, there are some elements perhaps that are lacking in that element of detail, and this is around the operating instructions and procedures for the manufacturing process. And where there's an element of lacking of detail, it runs the risk of errors and variation. And when we look at it as a Six Sigma process, if we see that the variation is too steep and too great, we're basically generating waste. So the reasons for looking to establish better methods and practices is, of course, so that the greater the level of process and standardization, the greater element of control, which then means that we can measure this, and by measuring it, of course, we can improve it. So that's standardization. The next area that I'd really like to kind of look at is simplifying the flow of manufacturing processes in pharma. In the lean concept, the most effective way of manufacturing is keeping a nice simple single piece flow with small batches so that you can be more responsive to the need of the customer. Obviously that can be a little bit of a challenge in pharma because they generally run in larger batch processes, and this is due to things like lab testing, but also to create enough product so that there's warehousing in place and stocks, so that there's less of a need for these multiple changeovers, because with multiple changeovers you run the risk of contamination between product to product. Typically, I find that pharma plants run with an element of capacity in them and surplus. And this is due to the need for those things that we spoke about around larger batches and the needs for checking and WIP generation.
This is where those kind of market forces that are driving different behaviour. They're driving, typically we see it kind of smaller batches, smaller batch size, more complex variations between products, more changeovers again.
Yeah. So the problem running in the current methodology of larger batches and that mindset is that it can quite often hide elements of downtime because of the capacity. Does it really matter if we had a 10-minute overrun of changeover? Well, in the current world we live in, yes, but previously it may have been a little bit of a, well, it's not so much of a problem, because at the end of the day, the drug is being produced the right quantities at the validated quality rate, and the customer is getting it at the agreed time.
But that question about capacity is quite key. Without data, how do you know what your
true
capacity actually is? What's your underutilized capacity? What is your essentially wasted capacity by overproducing or reproducing or rework or
And it's important to realise that whilst producing a safe and quality drug is very important, when we look at the larger batches and the old methodology of producing these things, it's produced to the right standards, but what we need to look at in closer detail is the fact that the cost of manufacture is much, much higher than the way people are doing things now. So in an ideal world, we'd look to embed Lean and GXP together, and it's really important that they have an equal footing and that they're embedded into the culture of the business. And by doing that, we can look to develop things like pharma lean plants, and in that element we would have these things like the shorter batches and the faster changeovers, which all allow us to adapt to the change in the customer's demand.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we've addressed the elements of why we need to do something about this.
Yeah,
there's obviously a need.
Let's think about it. I think there's a stat out there that says roughly the average OEE within the pharma sector is around 30-35%.
Yeah,
there's plenty of scope to be more efficient with those kind of numbers, and the wins should be quite easy to achieve at the beginning, only if you've got good data to back them up, and you're not talking about somebody's opinion, somebody's subjective opinion about what they should do.
Yeah.
You want to back it up with kind of real fact.
So we've taken that next step. We've agreed that there's a reason for us to do it.
Yep.
We've then gone out and found the best solution provider.
Yep.
Which of course is us. And then once the system has been put in, there's an element of bedding in, but generally we'll find that there's 2 or 3 things that become quite apparent quite quickly.
Yep.
And the first one that I just talked to you briefly about is slow running and speed losses. So if we looked at this pre a system going in, you would generally find that it's quite difficult to keep a track of minute by minute the run speed of the line. The most practical way of monitoring this possibly could have been every hour, or at worst case at the end of the day. You're seeing that you've supposed to produce 20,000 and you produce 19,000, and at the morning meeting the next day we start to question, well, why were we at 19,000 rather than 20,000? Yep. We agree some corrective actions, but really that's too little too late. We can't get back that lost throughput that we could have done something about. So the worst examples I've seen are people stood at the end of the line, highly paid consultants with a stopwatch, sort of timing the throughput and giving you a figure, and then coming back to you with some ideas about how they might improve that. And personally, that's a bit of a daft thing to be doing, because once the consultants left, we're really back to where we were.
That's it. And you want your highly paid consultant to be kind of adding some value. You know, the value is not to have this person at the end of your line with a ticker and a stopwatch.
Yeah.
You know, if you could provide the information that he or she needs, but do it in a simple way, then the kind of the value add is there to be obtained, really.
Definitely. So that was kind of the challenges around capturing slow running. But once the system's in place, you might see quite quickly that the line's running at 90% of what it should be targeted at. Yeah. And when you go down to the line and start questioning the guys running the line, the general response is that, oh, well, we run it at 90% because it just runs better that way.
Yeah.
And that's fine, except for it's not really challenging the root cause of the problem, that when we do run at 100% target rate and we do have some problems, we should be fixing those problems rather than compensating for that.
Yeah, when Bob turns the speed down on the line, he has an easier life because his line stops less. Yes. But actually, at the end of the day, you maybe make less products, you know, and we're not here to make Bob's life easier. We're here to drive kind of value for the business. And if the business is looking for the value to get more product out the door, then, you know, Bob might have a slightly more difficult day, then so be it. We need to find ways to make Bob's life easier.
Yeah.
But it shouldn't be by turning the speed down to the detriment of the business.
Yeah. So then the second piece is the visibility of minor stops. So minor stops are almost impossible to capture on a paper-based system. This is because, one, it's almost invisible to the human eye. So if it stops for 10 seconds, 20 seconds, realistically, if you've got your back turned to it, can you see that thing happening?
No.
And secondly, it's in human nature for an element of rounding. So you'll have that the stop was really 20 seconds, but the operator rounded it up to a minute, or it was 2.5 minutes, but suddenly it was 5 minutes, and you can sort of see that thing cascading. But it's really important to realize that once you have that automated data capture, that you can start to see visibility of these micro stops, and they can start to build up and paint a bit of a picture. So much so that in previous iterations when you're running on a paper-based system, you might think that your worst performing asset was the blister pack machine, because it had the largest amount of breakdowns. However, when you accumulate all the elements of the micro stops, it might actually look, I'll use an example, the palletizer is the one piece of equipment that over a day has actually caused the most headaches, the most minor stops. And therefore, if we were to look at it from a TPM, total preventative maintenance strategy, we would look at targeting perhaps the palletizer rather than the blister pack machine. And the third and final one from me around the importance of using this data and what will it do for you, it's this single source of truth, the one truth. How many times have we been to operational meetings where there's the engineering team, the operational team, and the technical team all come with their version of the truth of why this issue occurred. And really, the data and having this amalgamation of data means that we all come to the meeting with the same information, the same truth, and it allows us to target better and more targeted conversations at our morning meetings, rather than perhaps squabbling over which was the problem. And therefore, we can start to target things like repair times and mean time between failures and repairs, because we're actually having constructive conversations around the data itself.
And so to do those really kind of basic things, again, do we need 60,000 data points from the production line, or do we just need 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 pieces of information that drive our thinking and drive our behaviour towards the things that are going to give us the biggest bang for our buck? Essentially, that's what we want to be able to do, is demonstrate the value of data towards driving a continuous improvement process, really. Good. Excellent. Okay, so just as a little bit of a background to SimLogic, we've got a kind of wide experience in a number of different sectors. So please feel free to kind of reach out to us if you'd like to discuss further any of the topics that we've discussed or brought to mind in today's webinar. We've got around 5 minutes or so for some questions. So if you do have any questions, again, pop them in the control panel. I've got one here that was sent in earlier. Let me just grab that. So this was sent in by Andrew Hall. Thanks very much, Andrew. The question is, a significant workforce transformation is underway as manufacturing experiences a wave of technological advancement and the rise of new digital industrial technologies collectively known as Industry 4. Where does SimLogic see that they will fit to or / help to reshape the business and economic landscapes over the next 10 to 15 years? So it's a great question, Andrew, and it's one that I kind of come across quite a lot. You know, these technologies, they're coming thick and fast. The analogy I always use when I'm speaking to people is to say, you know, I've got a daughter in primary school, and she's, you know, way better at using a tablet than I am. You know, when she tries to open up a laptop at home, and you know, the instant reaction is for them to try and touch the screen to get it to try and do something, and she can do things on the iPad that I didn't know how to do, you know, and these are the types of skills that are going to be coming through the workforce, and when they hit the workforce, they're going to be demanding more of us than we're currently able to give. You know, if people with those kind of skills hit the workforce, and we're saying, you know, here's your PC, it's going to take you 5 minutes to boot it. You might as well go and make a cup of coffee. And by the way, can you write all this down on paper, please? You're going to start to kind of disengage those people that are coming through. So the work that we have to do as SimLogic is trying to help drive these technologies into manufacturing. Where we want to be, where we want to be positioned, is we want our clients to come to us with the challenges. We want them to come to us with the challenges that say, I've got a strategic initiative this year that says I need a 3% reduction in my waste on my production lines. How can you help us? We're the people with the experience of what technology is available to use that technology to stitch them all together to find a solution. Because at the end of the day, let's not be funny about it, but technology for technology's sake is going to do nobody any good at all.
No.
You need to find the right bits of technology that you can stitch together to give you a solution.
Yeah.
And the solutions are becoming simpler and simpler. As we said earlier, that the simple solution might be a wireless sensor back to a data collector and then back into a historian and so on and so on and so on, rather than a complete data lake of all the possible tags from all the possible PLCs on the shop floor.
Yeah.
That's a really interesting technological project, but it pushes the objective of being able to drive that 3% waste reduction kind of 3 years, 5 years in the future.
Yeah.
So this is where we kind of see SimLogic as coming in and adding the value to those discussions. It might be as simple as let's say a non-validated environment where one of the critical parameters is you want to monitor the ambient temperature in a room. A typical industrial solution to that would involve PLCs, thermocouples, cables, wiring, so on and so on and so on and so on. When actually, if you kind of take your industrial hat off and you put your "I'm just going home now" hat off, and when you get home, you want to open up your iPad and click a button on the fridge that reorders your milk, for example, from Amazon. Put that hat on and have a think about, actually, I can get a device that monitors the temperature. It's not important that I have it to 5 decimal places. As long as it's within 2 or 3 degrees, that's all I need.
Mm-hmm.
And use a simpler device to find a simpler solution to give you the information that you want. So that's kind of how we see ourselves, I guess, as a company to drive those kind of behaviours and solutions to within our customers.
I think that also it's important for us to realise that we've got a vast amount of knowledge within our 4 walls as a business. Mm-hmm. And it's that when you decide to work with us and that we start to do work with a vast array of people, that we've got an awful lot of information and knowledge mm-hmm. around the industry, best practices, how to do things, and that it should be about sharing that knowledge and technology at the same time.
Absolutely. Just looking at the time, I've got time. I'll probably squeeze one more question in. So I've got a question here from, just reading off the screen, Steve Warren. Steve is asking about the security of the wireless devices and how they would get data onto the industrial networks. Okay. What we need to consider there is, obviously, when we talked about this, the wireless sensors, they've got to get data back to a kind of a data concentrator, some kind of collector in the middle that's going to move that data. Typically, at that point, we would be using things like OPC UA, which is it's becoming a very commonplace industrial protocol now. OPC has been around for years, but UA has kind of taken that next step up recently, and that's enabling us to move data from data concentrator to server or data concentrator to cloud securely using encrypted packets and so on. So security is kind of taken care of at that level via the protocols that we're using, and then obviously the firewalls and the other network infrastructure that you would have within your environment. Yeah. So time for one more question. I've got a question here as to how would that work in data collection if I had multiple sites. So multiple sites is an interesting question. Again, this is where something like cloud computing would come in. You could have a single instance of software within a cloud environment, could still make use of these kind of smart data collectors, smart devices on the shop floor. But instead of pushing data through perhaps your network, again, we could push them directly to the cloud using 5G. 5G is coming. It's going to be there. That's going to be the next thing that's coming in, that's making data more available to us. And again, there's inbuilt security protocols again within OPC UA, and other protocols are available, by the way. So again, just looking at the time, there are a couple more questions there that have popped up on the screen. We will endeavour to answer those in writing and follow up on the email. If you have any others, again, please drop a note across to inquiries at SimLogic, or feel free to reach out to us on the phone. Thanks for your time, Oliver.
Thank you.
I'll leave this screen up on the slides there for a couple more minutes if anyone wants to take down the email address, and we look forward to speaking to you again soon. Thank you.